to all of you for making the time and being here. I'd again request you all to put yourself on mute. And as through the proceedings, you can always put in your questions and feedback on the chat box. After the speaker is done with her presentation, we will be taking questions, and also I will go through the questions in the chat box as well. So looking forward to a wonderful evening with Kamaldeep. May I request our Vice President, Mrs. Sujini Balu, to please welcome everybody here, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Rupa. It gives me great pleasure in welcoming all of you to our conversation with Mrs. Kamaldeep and her initiative, Neelgar. On behalf of the committee and the members of Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu, I extend to you a very warm welcome, and thank you too for readily accepting Kamal to do this webinar with us. Kamaldeep is a pioneer in natural dye, block printing, bandhani, and leheria. She launched her brand, brand Neelgar in 1998 with just 4 artisans, and with a head brimming with ideas and a heart filled with hope. Nearly 2 decades later, she has 2,500 artisans working for her from various villages. The products that she's developed and specialized in were scarves, saris, furnishing, and mainly to start off with. Then her forte is paying attention in details, underscored by her passion for quality and creative innovations. Her deep-rooted, highly laudable philosophy of fair trade, women's empowerment, and sustainability. This was long before these words became a fashionable usage. Most start off in national level before they foray into the international arena. With Kamaldeep, it has almost been the opposite. Highly successful in the international scene, she has opted to be back in the country doing what she does best, build a strong fashion label, upholding the Indian heritage of textiles with a constant eye towards sustainability and showcasing our Indian textile heritage to the greatness that it is. So once again, I extend to you all a warm welcome, and thank you so much, Kamaldeep, for being here with us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sujini Balu. May I request Harita, who has officially become our webinar facilitator, to introduce the guest speaker for the evening, please.
Thank you, Rupa. Kamaldeep has been in the heart of Indian textiles and fashion industry for nearly 2 decades. Her brand, Neelgar, started out with 4 craftsmen and has grown to 2,500 craftsmen. Kamaldeep's amazing array of fabrics are manufactured using age-old methods of bandhani, shibori, tie and dye, and block printing. A world-renowned expert, her detailed knowledge of these techniques were garnered through many years of exploration and experimentation. Kamaldeep was always interested in patterns. When young, she drew and painted just because she enjoyed doing so. Later on, while pursuing a fashion design course, she realized it could be a career option. She remembers the feeling of unbridled awe, a magical experience when she made her first garment using the tie and dye process. This was just one aspect of her course, but it excited her the most. She then spent many hours making different combinations and patterns. By the end of the course, she had created an impressive collection of fabrics using this method and had also documented it. Her impressive portfolio gave her the opportunity to work with designer J.J. Walia, who taught her how to understand quality, finish, and color sense. She moved to Ahmedabad and worked as a designer at the Gujarat State Emporium for her expertise in textile techniques. Part of her job was working with karigars for the design development program. She had found her true calling. She began to travel.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's not audible. We can, be a little more.
Yeah. Part of her job was working with karigars for the design development project. She had found her true calling. She began to travel to the villages and meeting the karigars, sometimes stayed at their homes for months to help them hone their craft so that it could meet commercial requirements, and at the same time facilitate the development of villagers and their families. She gathered information on the craft indigenous to the people of Kutch. Her next eye-opener came when she attended the International Shibori Conference at NID. At the subsequent conference in Japan, she realized the impact of her work. Craft enthusiasts from around the world requested her to give talks and lecture demonstrations about her fascinating techniques. This took her to Switzerland, Malaysia, Canada, Germany, Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art, New York, and provided a great platform to showcase the work of India's talented artisans. A Karigar who had lived in penury until this project started managed to earn enough to build a home and get his child married, a tale that he repeats to this very day whenever she visits his village. Kamaldeep had to face many challenges apart from distance and finance. In the making of Bandhani fabric, the tying is done by the Muslim women of the Khattri community who are not allowed to leave their home. This technique is passed on from the mother to daughter. The dyeing is done by the men. Kamaldeep had to work out of a system so that not only would the garments be made on time, but also fit standards of quality. She had revived the process of Rogan using minerals and oil seeds to get gold and silver prints using metal blocks, mallets, and many kinds of recess dyeing and printing. She also helps the Bandhani craftspersons to create the Nalia prints for the Anokhi Museum. She provides a block printing day tour in Ahmedabad that begins with how the block is made and ends with the bulk printing process. Kamaldeep's passion lies in textile revival, not fashion designing. She also believes that the most successful way forward is in contemporizing the craft and making it suitable for today's needs. Over to you, Kamaldeep, as you share your passion for tie and dye and block printing.
Thank you for such a beautiful introduction, Harita, and namaste to everyone at the Craft Council and all the other people who are there. Let me start with by using the presentation that we have prepared. I think that will be very helpful. From beginning, let me see that. So as you all know that I'm Kamaldeep, and I have a website also on which you can see the pieces. So I think I'd like to, when Harita was talking about this whole thing, I was thinking there are so many different techniques that you talked about that I have been working with. And I think that is why this picture is very important, because for us, it is Bandhani, but for the Japanese and for many other countries, it is Shibori. And I think what I'm fascinated by in whole is Shibori as a word, which includes all of those techniques that I have been working with. So Shibori is like a wholesome word according to the Japanese. And according to them, there is no other word in English or Hindi which can be compared, because Shibori means every technique under resist dyeing and resist printing. I mean, this is one thing we have to be thankful to the Japanese for, that even though Bandhani has been practiced in India since ancient times, but they made it so famous as Shibori that every country I went to, people will look at it and say, Shibori? And I'll be like, yeah, Indian Shibori. You know, so it's kind of really interesting how the whole journey of Bandhani started from India and moved to so many different parts of the world. This is my basic introduction. I did my graduation in zoology because, like every other girl in those times, I wanted to be a doctor. And only when I discovered about NIFT I realized that my passion for all the textile techniques that I have been practicing as a child could turn into a profession. And so I did a fashion course of 2 years and then worked with Mr. J.J. Valaya, and then had the fortune of working with Gurjari. And I think that is what changed my life in many ways, because that was the first time I worked with the craft communities. And it is when you work with these craft communities who are so close to my house, which practically means that I was in Ahmedabad and Kutch was hardly 8 hours drive, and you saw a huge difference in their lives. But we'll talk more about it. And back to Shibori. So when you look at this piece, what do you see? Do you see Bandhani or do you see Shibori? What is the big difference? So if we look at very, very old Indian bandhani pieces, we will realize that most of the designs were completely filled with work. So if there is a dupatta, all the entire empty space will be filled with dots, and the pattern will be created with lines. In present times, most of the time it doesn't happen. Most of the empty space is left empty, which means bhara nahi jata. So we call it bharti ka kaam, khali space ko bhar dena, and that is what. But when I went to Japan, I saw that they have removed all the designs, and there is just this bharti ka kaam, which looks so elegant and so beautiful to me, with no design and just beautiful dots. So how exactly does bandhani happen? Traditionally, because bandhani was done only for certain communities by certain communities, and the designs were very limited. So usually they used blocks, and that is why you see blocks there. So the blocks were first printed on the fabric to create the pattern, and then the woman will start the tying. But when people like me came in, and I'm sure many other people, we realized that those designs were too limiting and we needed more designs because the association had changed. Bandhani was not anymore for only the same communities, but for many other, because a lot of those communities had actually moved away from their traditional designs. So now how could we continue this craft, or how could we help this craft survive? We had to find new markets, and we had to make other people relate to it, understand it, and feel that they would
Kamaldeep, I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Have you started sharing screen? Have you started sharing your slide?
Yes. Can you not see?
Because we are not able to see. We are only hearing you talk.
Oh,
We're not able to see the screen. Yeah. So maybe you need to start from the beginning. Just maybe quickly run through Kamaldeep.
Sure. Can you see it now? Like, can you see the slides now?
Yes, we can. Now we can. Yeah.
Are you seeing just me or the slides?
No, we can see the slide. Yes, we can see. It says it's the first screen, right? Neelgar by Kamaldeep Kaur. Yeah, you can just quickly run through until where you stopped.
Sure.
Yeah, you can go on. Yeah, thank you.
So, it might not be exactly the same words. So, this is a Japanese bandhani piece, as they call it shibori, and we call it bandhani. So when you see it, you obviously, I'm sure, look at it and think of bandhani. But it's the way the technique is done, which is very, very different. It's difficult to restart from exactly there.
That's okay. We won't hold you to the words. You can go on. You can just go with the flow.
So when I started working with bandhani, I was very highly inspired by the Japanese form of doing it, and I think we have to be very thankful to the Japanese that they have spread the word shibori all over the world. So every time I went to any country with my bandhanis, I saw that they recognize it immediately as shibori, and each time I had to tell them that it is Indian shibori. So what is very interesting is that even though it started in India, and every Japanese will tell you that it started in India, later on came to, traveled through Southeast Asia till Japan, the word bandhani is really not commonly known in other parts of the world. So we really need to work a lot more harder to make it more known to the world. And I think that part has been done by the Japanese very well. So this is my basic introduction. I did my graduation in zoology. And after that, I did a fashion course. And here is one of my favorite examples of shibori or bandhani. It's exactly what I'm wearing. I'll try to bring it closer. So basically, we call it bharti ka kaam, or pure space ko bhar dena. Just as you see it in the screen, where there are red dots and a subtle gray-brown toppy colored fabric. Traditionally, what we used to do in India also in terms of bandhani was that entire space was filled with bandhani, and in between there was design. So for example, if there's a flower, it's a floral pattern, the rest of the space will also be completely filled. If you look at most of the designs which you find in museums or old books and on, But in present times, most of the designs that we see, the empty space remains empty because one, people do not want to do so much work. Two, one doesn't get paid for that kind of work. And the amount of time it takes, because what happens in bandhani is that when a woman ties a piece of bandhani, it's only when she finishes it that she will get paid for it. So a sari like this that we make takes about a year to make. So she will get paid after a year. So not everybody is capable of doing that, or not everybody is also has the patience to do that kind of workmanship. So it's very important to keep those people, give those people constant work who are doing this quality of work. And also, I think the Western world, or even other parts of Southeast Asia, which are modernized a lot, are able to relate to those designs very well because they are not very floral or very complicated designs. Now, here on the screen, you're seeing on one side blocks and on the other side papers. Traditionally, because bandhani was worn only by certain communities and made only by certain communities, as a result, there were blocks that we used. And these blocks were printed on the fabric to be able to create the pattern. And then we started tying on it. But as the traditional communities moved away from those designs and we wanted to expand the market, we realized that we have to make more papers. So just like for embroidery, we make papers or screens, we started making these papers. So pointer, so I can do a points like exactly which one is. Okay. Okay. So here you see some all the papers that we make, and constantly we are adding new designs to it. And here you see the block printed version, like the blocks have been printed on this fabric so that it's ready to be tied. I think you come to look at this one. Now here are the magic tools. Often people ask me that, is there machinery developed yet to make bandhani? And I always laugh that even the Japanese or the Germans haven't bothered to do it. Even they have left us with with our hands, like we still make it with hand. So here is the blue balls that you're seeing are actually threads, which are super fine cotton threads, which are used to tie the bandhani. And you also see the golds. You also see this gold finger ring sort of a thing, a ring, metal ring. This is used to pick up the points. And the blue pipe is just a thin pipe, usually made of glass, from which the thread is passed to be able to move the to be able to tie the bandhani. And on the left hand of the screen, you see a tied version. So we always start with a white fabric, like the base is always white, and then we start tying it. Here we have done multiple sizes in terms of tying to be able to do. Now you see here you can see these red lines. So traditionally geru, the mitti of geru or the mud of geru was used to print the design, which now very few people use. Most people have shifted to Neel or blue, which is not like the indigo Neel, but the synthetic version that we use. And because from geru, the entire color could not be removed. That was the limitation, while with Neel, we can remove the color. But this is what was used traditionally. And the tying is very, very fine, as you can see, and very close to each other. Now here are two different women. The one who has her head covered in a red dupatta is from Rajasthan. And the one with the yellow dupatta is from Kutch. It's also very interesting for me to see how distinguishedly they both are dressed. And they both are sitting outside their houses in full light with friends. I don't have the picture of the friends, I'm sorry, but just sitting, chatting, like in old times that people used to do embroideries. That is exactly how still they do bandhani. So often when people call me and say, I need it urgently, I'm like, it's impossible. They can only sit and work for so much time. There is nothing like urgent in bandhani. That word doesn't exist for them. So basically, these are women who work in their houses, look after the kids, look after the family, and in between, whenever they have time and whenever they have the patience, they will work on bandhani. So usually in a day, they do maximum 1 hour, 1.5 hours, but I don't know anybody who does more than that. And at a stretch, it is usually half an hour that they will work. Because imagine the movement, this whole movement that the hand is moving to tie it. How long can you do it continuously? You can't do it for more than half an hour. Now here you see the dyeing process. Once the piece has been dyed, after that the dyeing comes. So the dyeing is usually done by men, while the tying is done by women, because I always laugh that men don't have the patience to sit down and tie. It's the women who have that patience. So here is on the left hand side you see the piece which is being tied, and there are these I always forget these words. Clamps. These clamps to hold the colors separately. So the piece will be tied. As you can see, the dyeing is happening. It has been held with a clamp, so the two different colors can be dyed. So often different ways are used to dye different colors. Here, the whole piece has been dyed in red color, and then it is covered with plastic and ropes so that that part can be protected, and the red part will again be dyed in a separate color, probably black. Here you see some leheria and shibori, also different forms of shibori, like stitch resist and leheria, which have been tied and dyed and hanging outside to be dried. Now, this is what is fascinating, a very traditional design. It's one part, or the central medallion of the Chandrakoni dupatta or a sari. You can see the center or the chand or the circle, which is what represented the Chandrakoni, which means the moon. And you can see how tiny and how minute the dots are. So at Neelgar, we have been focusing very strongly on workmanship and on quality, because I feel that's what is lacking. I mean, often I've gone to exhibitions in other parts of the world, and they ask me that if India can do this quality of work, why do people come with what I love to call €5 things or $5 things? Why doesn't India make more of this? Because we are capable of making this. And there are very few people who want to go in this direction, because it takes a lot more, it's much more challenging. It takes a lot more effort to do this quality of work. And we have been constantly training people and constantly making sure that people get constant work, which is the most important thing. Otherwise, why would people move away from this quality of work? In fact, that's one of the reasons why I came towards Bandhani. I met somebody who was an antique dealer who showed us a couple of pieces, and these pieces were very ancient and were super, super, super fine. And when I asked him who made them, he said those people have died. And I think that is what was challenging, and that is how I took it. So when I started working for took Bandhani and brought it to this level. So when I started working initially, when I started my career, Ministry of Textiles offered me a lot of design development projects. And each time I tried to take tie and dye or shibori and natural dyes in the process. So you can see there were 6 different projects which I did with 6 different communities or groups of people. And each time I tried to introduce a different technique of shibori, because specifically those techniques which were not being practiced or have been lost totally, but have been adopted by other countries or other cultures, and they were doing beautiful work with them. So here is a technique called clamping. Now, a lot of designers are using it and making garments out of it. But this is around 1998 when I did this whole project, wherein we developed clamps. In fact, during that whole process, I found a karigar's house who was unfortunately no more in this world. And we saw a couple of clamps in his kind of backyard lying there, which they haven't used for maybe last 50 years. When I was trying to explain to him, this is what I like to get done. And in India, they only used it to separate spaces to create 2 colors. But in Japan, they use it to create patterns. Now, these are the first 8 women who I came across during my during another project of tie and dye, who could do super fine work. But they did not want to do a lot of work in that, because they wanted pieces which would finish within a week or within a month and they'll be paid off. Because they were not confident that they would be paid after such a long time, and would people take their work or not, because probably they have had bad experiences in life. So what we did was initially that we did super fine work, but we added shibori, we added other techniques so that the piece will finish very quickly. But then slowly we started doing more intensive projects. So these are more of those experiments that we did during the design development projects. Each project was 6 months long, and 6 months we worked with the community and tried to make as many changes in their traditional practices as possible in a very practical fashion. And most of them had very long-term effects on their communities or on the crafts, and they get constant work because of this. This is one of my favorites, the Siddhi community, because other than Japan, Africa is another country which affects me a lot. The Siddhis are an African tribe who live in Gujarat since last, I think, 800 years. And they came while there were a lot of ships that used to go from India to Africa for trade. And they used to work on those ships, and some just stayed back. And there is a whole village of this African tribe who speak Gujarati, who live the Gujarati way, who are totally Gujarati in more ways than one. And I was doing a project for the Ministry of Culture, Department of Culture in Gujarat, wherein we were working on tribal costumes, and the Siddhis are a recognized tribe. So we started studying their traditional costumes, and when I found that, because I was working a lot with shibori and indigo in those times, so we recreated the entire costumes that they were using, and they were so amazed when they went to Africa to find that their original or traditional costumes are very similar to these. This is another project that we did, and this was a very interesting one because we had to mix many different communities, the communities of weaver, the communities of dyers, and a village called Bujori where they do a lot of weaving, and they were only working with wool in those times. But as a result, what happened was that they only had work for like 3 months a year, and the rest of the time they were either farming or doing other jobs. So what we did was that we added silk, we added cotton, we added nylon wires and things like that to create textures, to do shibori, and create interesting patterns. These were, of course, done for the fashion show, so that is why they are like really ooh la la. But at the same time, we did some very interesting pieces out of that, and they continue to do natural dyes, something they were not doing till then. So till then, they were only working with chemical dyes or synthetic dyes. And now many people in the village continue to practice natural dyes after this training that we gave them. And they have continued to practice working with silk and wool, which they did not do in the past. As a result, they now have work throughout the year, and sometimes they have bookings for like next 4 to 5 years. These were men's shawls that we developed for the international market. The project with Ikat. Now, what was happening was that when I was doing initially these design projects, and a lot of new things were being developed, and the government was promising these people that once the projects are finished, they will get constant work, which they were not getting. Because the government did not have the kind of buyers or the organization. So what started happening was these craftsmen then started approaching me that, why don't you give us work? We did all the things that you wanted us to do. We developed all the products, and now we need work. So I realized that that's, I mean, suddenly it became like a responsibility more than just fun. And then I had to start giving them work. So these were silk scarves that we made for the international market. And we started getting a lot of orders. So in those times, because I was working a lot with shibori techniques, you see some examples of the different shibori techniques. And we found different American buyers who started selling it all over America. Now, also when I was working with these things, I started realizing that what I'm doing is not just commercial practice, because my heart was not very commercial about the whole thing. For me, it was more of a passion and love, which I think it still is in more ways than one. So I started making a lot of pieces which could be used as a painting, as an art piece, and can be kept in your house as an art piece. So a lot of my pieces were actually selected by for art exhibitions, and they were displayed in different conferences or art exhibitions in different parts of the world. So from Korea to Japan to many different countries. The first piece that you see here is a long blue piece, which is a 20-meter single piece, wherein we worked a lot with shibori, many different shibori techniques, and we have tried to create from the waves of sea till the clouds using different shibori techniques. This piece was in an exhibition in Ahmedabad itself, which was curated by a Dutch artist. The blue piece after that are all three are silk, and we have about they were in different exhibitions again, and one of them is most important because it has, like, once we created it, we realized it has 165,000 dots. Because traditionally these dupattas were made in a 60 pana fabric, like a 60-inch wide fabric. So I wanted to recreate it as it is. Presently, all the silk is 45 inches. So we actually had to get the silk woven in that size and then recreate the pattern as it is. This is an exhibition I did in Paris with a local architect, and we had even the director of Louvre come over and visit us. You can see here, because it is Paris, again, I had a totally different kind of approach to it, and texture was for me the most important thing, in colors. Every country that I go to, I try to focus very much on what kind of colors will they relate to, what kind of designs will they relate to, because I think that's very important when you're trying to take these crafts around. Because one could always travel around with your crafts and sell them and get it over with, but that's not what I wanted to do. For me, it was very important that people understand it, people relate to it, and this could create a future market for these crafts. Otherwise, they will be over very soon, like it has happened all over the world. How many of the traditional crafts survive? Like when I was in Japan, the only 2 women I saw in kimono, I only saw 2 women in kimono or shibori kimonos in a train. But other than that, we only saw them in the Shibori Symposium, who specifically dressed for us. This was a project done in collaboration with the Princes of Malaysia, wherein they found a ship under the earth, and there was an exhibition that was being created. The ship was full of ceramics. So they wanted to recreate like a Malacca market from old times, wherein they used to have trade with India. So we created this garment. So she designed all the garments and I designed all the bandhani, and was an amazing project. This is my work with another Malaysian designer who designed all the garments. And again, we worked on traditional Chinese Malaysian motifs and local Malaysian motifs. And while he used a lot of the Malaysian weaving, and we mixed them together to create this fashion show at the Weft. No, at the same time, I feel that, I mean, for me, this work is 50% of my work is research-oriented, research and teaching, and 50% of my work is production and selling, because I think you need a very strong balance in that. So I've been giving workshops all over the world to teach these techniques to professionals, as well as people who are just enthusiasts who love to learn about dyeing and printing. And you find them everywhere, don't you? People need to relate to a piece of textile. Then only they will want it, or they will understand it. Otherwise, they will say how much and why. You know, I mean, I come across a lot of people who will say it's bandhani, so why should it cost so much? And I'm like, do you actually, I mean, if a sari of bandhani takes about a year to make, I often ask my customers that what would you be paid for 1 year of work if you were giving 1 year of your life into making a piece? But when you do a workshop, you actually realize how much work goes into it. When you see a piece of fabric and you see, oh, so many dots, you think, wow, lots of work. But when you do exactly the same, when you start tying exactly the same dots, after an hour, you have like 8 dots, and then you realize, wow, that's a lot of work. And that is going to take really a long time. So here you see different countries, cultures, people relating to it, and very happy about it. I mean, now in this COVID times, we have to do all these non-human, staying away and all this stuff, which is not so interesting. And people have often, during these times, a lot of people have asked me to do workshops online. And somehow I've not been able to say yes, because I think for me that relationship is very important. The human relationship, to be able to touch, feel, see those textiles. And I feel then only you can actually learn in reality or experience. So Miat is another favorite of mine, a museum in Belgium, where I discovered so many interesting things. Because in India, for example, we still have a lot of streets where the name of the street is from the technique that they used to play. We have like a Chipa Gully in Ahmedabad where all the Chipas used to be there, which means the block printers used to be there. The same way in Belgium, across the Museum of Miat, we have these streets where they used to do bleaching. So I can never pronounce the word right, but they have this whole street where they used to do bleaching or dyeing or washing of clothes. So Now here you can see again the only man who attended, I mean, probably the only professional man who kind of attended my unprofessional, I mean, that man who was not into shibori or dyeing. And he was a lawyer who attended, the guy in the violet shirt. He was a lawyer and he came to attend my workshop in Switzerland. And that was like most amusing for us to teach him. But of course, I mean, a lot of professionals had learned from me in different parts of the world. As you can see another picture wherein I'm in this orange sweater in Korea. Where we had a lot of men and women learning, but then they were all professional textile people. Okay. So in 2012, I was invited to Estonia to give a workshop. And when I got this call from Estonia, I was like, wow, okay, where exactly is Estonia? So it took me some time to figure it out on the map and how exactly to reach there. And I discovered it was very close to Finland and very close to St. Petersburg. And what was interesting was that it was a textile center wherein they invite people to teach these techniques, because this textile center helps a lot of the museums all over Europe, and all the textiles, old textiles, which need retouching or redefining, are sent to this center for retouching. So all the people who work there need to be experts in different kind of techniques. And so I went there to teach natural dyes, because a lot of the old pieces which are in the museums are have used natural dyes in their making. So here you can see a couple of more examples from different parts of the world where I have been trying my best to teach and make people affected by shibori, just like I am affected. Because I think there is a magic to it, and especially every time you open the piece. I mean, when you tie it, you're confident you know what exactly is going to come out. But when you dye it and open it, you are always going to smile, because it's usually not what exactly you were thinking about. And you can see them smiling and thinking like, wow, this is not what I thought it was. Or maybe it's beautiful. So natural dyes is another thing which is a very interesting way of dyeing. A lot of people tend to think of it in a different way. I mean, we all talk about we should work with natural dyes, but a lot of people don't think about the fact that traditionally natural dyes were practiced because most of those dye plants were grown commercially, and they were grown for the sake of natural dyeing, which is not happening in the present times anymore. So we have to be really conscious and careful about which particular plants we use for natural dyes. Are they easily accessible? Are they available for these purposes? Here you can see Mrs. Neeru Kumar, one of my favorite designers who has taken design to a totally different level. And I had the pleasure of giving a workshop in her space, teaching her craftsmen how to do natural dyes. So again, these are different projects. Now, so also I've been trying to work with a lot of museums, because often they have to associate with Indian crafts, and I've also been organizing tours, textile tours for museum people, for people who are textile enthusiasts, so that they can relate to the crafts in a more serious manner, and they can see what goes behind the scenes and how much effort is gone in making all of these pieces. So if you guys decide to come to Ahmedabad ever, I'll be happy to take you all out on a printing tour, on a textile printing tour, and show you the amazing number of textile techniques that exist in Ahmedabad, just in Ahmedabad, in printing. And here is the Neelgar product range. So all the different techniques that I have been talking about, we have been, of course, practicing them and making them into pieces. So we've been working a lot with silk majorly, because the kind of quality and the kind of pain that goes into making these pieces, I feel, is done more justice when we do it on silks. So these are some of the dupattas. There are two ways that we work. One is we try to revive all the old traditional designs which have completely disappeared, or they have changed shape into something very, very strange and you cannot recognize it. But also at the same time, for the younger crowd, I think we need to make more contemporary designs who can recognize it. Like, for example, Harita here would probably not recognize the Chandrakoni and would not know what to do with it, or why was it made traditionally. But I'm sure she would recognize the red waves, because its waves, and it is done in so many different ways, and anybody in the world will be easily able to, you know, wear it without any hesitation, without any traditional glitch to it. So also when I started working in US or Europe, that was something that in US I saw that people were easy to accept anything, but in Europe they didn't want anything which was ethnic. So they wanted something which was easy to go, which could gel and with their culture. Then only they would be able to adopt it. And the same was true in Southeast Asia, until unless it was very formal form of clothing. These are different block prints that we work with. So we try to create our own blocks from different cultures again, and you see that in shibori and bandhani, as often people come to me and say that we want it as it is. We want to wear it as it is. We don't want to flatten it. We don't want to iron it. We love the texture. So here are all these different puckered textures that we have tried to create through bandhani. These are some of the scarves and shawls that we have been doing for the international market for many years. So even in Leheria, we have tried to recreate the texture, to keep the texture as it is, which gives it a very beautiful look. These pieces are made in natural dyes. The shibori scarf is made in my own kitchen. And these are block printed. So in block printing, we have tried to focus a lot on discharge block printing. We don't do much garments at Neelgar, but we do some garments. But the saris have been very popular, and people have loved saris, especially the kind of work we have been doing on saris, because most of the time you come across very traditional designs in saris and very traditional colors. But I felt that it was really important to break away from that, what I love to call glitch of just pink orange. I mean, I do pink orange, but I also love my grays. It's also been very interesting for me to see the difference between the traditional markets and the so-called upcoming markets, or the younger crowd who will, I mean, very often I'm in an exhibition and I will have a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law, and the daughter-in-law wants to buy a gray for her wedding and the mother-in-law wants her to buy a red for her wedding, and that goes on. So we have been also trying to understand those things and, you know, try to reply to those. So I mean, because I worked for so long in the international market, I only used to do grays, blues and blacks, I'll be very truthful, and a bit of maroon. But the moment I came to India, I realized you can't live without pink. So I had to start making a lot of pink really. And also, so though I enjoy to stay away from the garments, but whatever little garments we have been making have been very popular. And in those we try to, this is a whole series of reversible jackets that we did, in which I try to give different techniques on each side. So some of them have bandhani on one side, some have shibori, some have leheria. Well, I'm happy to answer more questions if there are any. Thank you, dear, for your patience.
Thank you, Kamaldeep. But before we proceed, maybe if in a very layperson's, perspective, if you could just quickly tell us how how the process is different from tie and dye to shibori, to bandhani, to shibori, to leheria. Because while visually we know how to differentiate them, it would be interesting to know the briefly the technique involved. So it also gives us an essence of how beautifully you amalgamated different techniques together and not making it look, making it look seamless to us. So that would be nice if you could answer, give us an idea briefly.
So if you talk about bandhani, for example, first the design is made on a piece of paper, on a big tracing paper. And bandhani is always made on 2 folds or 4 folds, depending on the fabric. If the fabric is thick, then we do it on 2 folds. If the fabric is very thin, then we do it on, if the fabric is very thin, then we do it on 2 folds. Very few people will do it on a single layer of fabric, because so for example, a dupatta that I'm wearing, if I don't know if it's very clear, but you can see that there are 2 sides to it. One is go in and one is kind of puckered up. So that is because this fabric was tied in double. So here is a line, and this was folded like this. And when you open it, you see two different textures. But if you stretch it, it will look exactly the same. Now, what we use is this, this, which is what we call a nakhalia, or an extended nail. So a lot of people just have a long nail, and a lot of people use these. This is the Rajasthan version, as I call it, which is like super pointed. And this is the Kutch version, which is comparatively less pointed. So one has to be really careful when one works with it, because you can't really push it. So for example, when you have this piece here, what we do is that we use this nakhalia to pick up the points. And then you start tying with a super fine thread. And you continue. Now this is just an example, but depending on how fine or how tiny you want them to be, it has to be like super close. And also different people will have different practices. So in the same family, sometimes this is a tight piece. In the same family, sometimes there are women who will have for example, I have come across like a mother who will do very tiny work, but the daughter does not do that tiny work. So different people could have different kind of practices. So that is kind of the basic of it. What happens is that depending on how tiny or how fine it is, the time taken is very important. And the people who work on cotton and the people who work on silk, again, are very different. They need a very different kind of skill level, because those people who work on because silk tend to slip. So you need a totally different kind of hand for it. So that's about bandhani. This is a piece of leheria, for example. So you see thinner lines and you see thicker lines. Now in leheria, what happens is that we have to roll the fabric. So we roll the fabric like this. And when it is completely tightly rolled, after that you tie it. So depending on how thick you want the bands to be, you tie it accordingly. So here we use much thicker threads. The threads for leheria and for bandhani are totally different. So also when you try to work with any of these techniques, there's a lot of technicality involved about what kind of threads, what kind of fabric, how fine the tying should be, and all of those things need to be understood also. Now again, this kind of tying is also done by women. So just like bandhani, the leheria tying is also done by women, and the dyeing continues to be done by men. From what I understand, because traditionally a lot of the dyeing was done in indigo or neil, wherein there were a lot of associations about what is right and what is wrong. They believe that neil dyeing, when it is being done, a woman should not be menstruating, because if that happens, the dye bath will spoil. So a lot of us believe that that is the reason why men continue to do the dyeing till today, even though it is not indigo anymore. Now again in leheria, depending on how complicated the design or color is, there will be multiple tying or not. Now this, for example, is a different form. This is a kind of shibori, wherein we use another kind of clamps. And there are many different kind of clamps we can use to create many different patterns. Here it all depends upon the folds. We use wooden clamps and to fold the fabrics, and according to the folds, you will create a pattern. I don't have them handy. I didn't think about it, so otherwise I would have shown how that works. But I also use like ice cream sticks to make these patterns. So I discovered that that could work very well. And so we just fold the fabric between ice cream sticks, which I do often in workshops. And when people come, I start offering them ice cream sticks, and they believe that ice cream is coming, but usually I do it for time. So now this is what we call, in India, we call it shibori, right? But technically it is one form of shibori. Stitch resist, that is what it is, right? Now within stitch resist, there are maybe a few hundred designs that can be created, that are created in Africa, that are created in Indonesia, that are created in Japan. They are all different. So shibori is not just this. Shibori is bandhani, shibori is leheria, and each of those shibori forms have a different name. So it's like itijame shibori, this shibori, that shibori. I mean, you can go through the whole list. And so for this, again, we need different skill level. So these are women who have to know good embroidery who will be able to do this, not good tying. So it's really interesting how deep this whole format of shibori is. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, Kamaldeep. But why do you say they need to know good embroidery, like, and not just the tying technique?
Yeah, so when you're working with this particular technique is what I mean, because this is done by stitching, not by tying.
Okay. Okay. So, and we also have a question in our chat box, which is Vidya, who's asked if we learn the tie and dye technique in a workshop, is it something we can do as a hobby at home and make scarves, etc.?
If you learn it from me, yes, you can. I'll make sure.
All right. So maybe next we should do is plan a workshop with you once the COVID season is over.
Yes. Come to Ahmedabad, see the beautiful city, see the Calico Museum.
Yeah, that too. Yes. Yeah, Priya says would love to. Any questions? Any other questions anybody would like to ask or put on the chat box? You're free to do so. We have some time.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if all these various patterns are all totally traditional, or you have put in a lot of innovation also into it, your own creativity and ideas. Are they all something that has been revived, or they are all, it's a combination of both?
So there are many different ways that I have been working. Initially, when I started working, I was not working with any traditional designs at all. I was only working with designs that I created because obviously, as a when you start, you're very enthusiastic and you have all these ideas that you want to see and you want to know what comes out of it. So I was creating a lot of geometrical patterns, and they look very different, of course, to my Indian eye, who's used to fool, vela and boote and all of those things. So I didn't want to work with any of that. But as I slowly started seeing, I guess, more outside India, I started realizing how rich India is, or how deep Indian traditions are. And you also, I think, start appreciating your own country as you come across other cultures. And also, as I started seeing the kind of destruction that is being done on a commercial scale of Bandhani, and how the old traditional designs are being completely lost when I compared them with museum pieces. And the more I traveled outside India, the more I realized that every country I went to, and some of the best museums I went to in the world, they only had Indian textiles. I mean, they didn't have textiles from their own traditions because they probably did not have such wide practices or whatever. But it was a pleasure to see some of the most amazing textiles there. And then I felt it's so important to revive those before they are completely gone, because even the Indian museums don't have such amazing collections as they have over there. So that is when I started working on the revival part, and we started trying to revive old designs. Also, sometimes I came across old designs with karigars who would show me, like, this piece belongs to my nani or my dadi, and since then it has never been done. So sometimes it's not been done for 100 years. So then we started reviving those designs because those were completely lost. But also, yes, I do try to revive some of the old traditional Japanese designs which have been completely lost, which I don't see being made anymore.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kamaldeep. There's a question from Sagan Wazir. They'd like to know a bit about the new block printing technique that you've revived.
Thank you, Shagan. Well, it was during my travels to Kutch, and while I was meeting with different craft people of my Bandhani craft people, that they introduced me to somebody who's really old and was in a really shattered condition, but he had these amazing blocks which were made of metal and not of wood. I mean, the base was wood, but the entire block was made of metal. And they were doing these wooden block printing for the local traditional communities which have stopped wearing them. So I mean, I can never forget that they were sitting with this red bundle of fabrics, which were basically saris for the fisherman community, and the fisherman community did not want them anymore. So, basically they were trying to somehow sell those textiles because that is the only thing they knew how to make. Because they were basically producing these textiles for 2 or 3 communities who have totally moved away from those traditional textiles, or moved away to screen printed versions because handmade versions are too expensive. Both the reasons exist. So when I approached them and I saw the blocks, most of the blocks were 250 years old. Some of them are broken due to the earthquake, but the blocks looked so contemporary because they were so old, because they were so ancient, they were completely out of the world. And I said, I will love to work with them, but we work with silk and we don't work with cotton. So what we had to do was that we had to put in a lot of technical expertise. So we get the silk dyeing somewhere else because these people had never worked with silk. And then we had to do all the printing with them. And then we had to take it for steaming to another place because they only do discharge printing and they were used to cotton. And we had such a fabulous response to them, not only in India, but also in France, because they could recognize them as their ancient prints. Because we always had these trade, and in France and Germany, in textile museums, they still have those amazing metal blocks in massive scales, which of course during the Industrial Revolution, they copied and they kind of converted into, huge blocks, which they have, not the small ones that we used. But as a result, they were able to relate to those. And I got very good response in the French market as well as the German market for those. In fact, in Germany, they still have people who work with those super tiny blocks, still those metal blocks, but hardly, I think, 3 or 4 people who I have come across who have seen in different design shows that I've participated in who do that kind of work, and they call it like Blaudrachen. So yes.
Do you have any images of that piece that you worked on?
Yeah. Could be any of the block ones. Just the tiny ones. Yeah. This or so I don't know if it's very clear, but
yes,
this is
can we have the spotlight? Yeah. Yes. Nice. Okay.
This is more of a modern block that we created. So at one point I tried to manage to find somebody who could make these. So this is a dragonfly design that we recently made, a new block for the same purpose, but it is a metal block and not a wooden block.
Metal.
This is one of the older traditional blocks, which is about 250 years old, but it was broken. And when we found somebody who could make the metal blocks, the only one time I met this man and I tried to create as many blocks as possible. And later on, I saw that in France also, they used to make the same block, same design. So I have no idea when or how this whole thing happened, this transition, but yes, it did. So these, what I'm showing you are these 3-meter silk fabrics that we create. So this is a shaded one. That's why I'm trying to show you the 2 colors. These are fabrics we make for like garmenting, and we also work with a lot of garment designers or a lot of what we call lekme designers who buy their entire collections from us for because they also need interesting fabrics to work on. So so we were, and I enjoy doing the fabric part. So we work on a lot of fabrics.
What?
Develop collections.
Can we move on to the vote of thanks? Okay, Harita? Yeah, can we move on to the vote of thanks?
Thank you, Kamaldeep Kaur, for this informative and interesting.
It's not very audible, so if you can just.
Thank you, Kamaldeep Kaur, for this informative and interesting webinar. And thank you for all the efforts you're taking in keeping the heritage of textiles alive. Your thoughts of how many more people to help rather than how much more money to make has truly made a difference. We hope to make a trip to Ahmedabad to experience the tour and see the products of Neelgar. I'd like to thank all the members of the Crafts Council of Tamil Nadu, the other state councils and the participants of the webinar. Thank you, Prashant, for the technical support for the webinar. See you soon next month for yet another interesting webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everything.